welcome everyone to this panel on democratizing workplaces in India. Um, we have a very distinguished panel with us today. Two of our panelists are here, the three that are supposed to be here. Mr. Bezwada Wilson is here. I think to most people he would need no introduction. He is the founder and national convener of the Safai Karmachari Andolan. He is a Raman Magsaysay awardee and a very strong voice in the civil society space in India on equal rights, on caste, and many other issues. So we look forward to hearing from Mr. Wilson soon. Professor Ratna Sudarshan is here too. She is the former director of the Institute of Social Studies Trust and also a very well-known academic researcher and a person who has intervened in the public policy and activist space for many years on informal work and has worked extensively on issues of the kinds of things that we're going to be discussing today. So I have some questions specifically that I'll pose to these two panelists as they go ahead. As I said, Ms. Anani Raja is also supposed to join. She is the leader of the Communist Party of India and General Secretary of the National Federation of Indian Women. She was here earlier but had some technical difficulties, so she's dropped off. Hopefully she'll be able to join us. Before I think most of the session will be the panelists sharing their thoughts. I'll just take a few minutes to lay out the basic rationale of this panel. I should also say, by the way, that I'm Amit Basole. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm a faculty in the economics group at Azim Premji University. My own work has to do mostly with employment in India, job creation, quality of work, these kinds of issues. So, having said that, let me get into the panel itself. So, what we are talking about today here is the changing nature of work in India and workplaces. And one of the large recent changes in this regard has been the promulgation of the new labor codes, the Social Security Code, as well as the wage code, and the four labor codes under which existing labor laws have been gathered together. And these were passed last year, actually during the middle of the COVID pandemic, which of course forms another very important backdrop to the discussion on labor in India in recent times. So we will hopefully talk a little bit about these new labor codes and what that means for rights of workers and for changes therein. But then, these labor codes come on the backdrop of certain very long-run and important structural issues in India's labor landscape. So India being a developing country, being also a country where a large number of people still are engaged in agriculture as well as various other very small-scale informal work, we are talking about a labor surplus economy as it would be thought of in development economics. So we are talking about structurally labor being in a vulnerable position. And one of the important questions is what is the responsibility of the state in an economy like this, where employers tend to have a lot more power in the workplace and in the marketplace. That's an important structural context to keep in mind, on top of which there are long-run issues of caste, gender, and other inequalities, which are social inequalities but which manifest in certain specific ways when it comes to labor and work. So we will hopefully talk about women's work in India, women's labor force participation, women's paid and unpaid work, what has stood in the way of women participating more substantively in paid work in India, what challenges do they face when they do perform paid work, and so forth. With respect to caste, again, there are multiple kinds of questions that arise, many different forms of discrimination that are specific to the context. So if one is talking about formal workplaces, then one is talking about caste discrimination, let's say in the corporate sector or in the public sector, and what policies are being enacted to meet that. If one is talking about informal work, then there is again a range of issues, all the way from the most degrading kinds of informal work that has been uh, forced upon the Dalit or the scheduled caste workers. We're talking about manual scavenging, management of waste in a more broad sense, and so on. Mr. Wilson, of course, has written extensively about this and worked in this space for many years. So he will hopefully be commenting on that. But even when we move beyond the most degrading forms of informal labor, we are still talking about multiple discriminations. We are talking about the fact that Adivasi or Dalit workers tend to be overrepresented in all forms of casual work, whether it's agricultural casual labor or construction labor. So they tend to work at the margins of what is already a precarious economy, the informal economy. Um, and then the question arises, what forms of organizing or collective action have been undertaken, have helped, what kinds of public policy can help to end these discriminations and to make workplaces much more accountable and democratic. So, this is a very brief kind of an account of the multiple challenges that face labor in the Indian economy today, all the way from structural constraints or concerns to do with the fact that labor is in a weak bargaining position. Most workers don't have access to bargaining, formal collective bargaining, don't have access to social protection, are outside the ambit of laws. Then we have the context of the changing labor laws themselves, which many have argued have increased the level of precarity in the economy. And then we have these caste and gender issues that also lie on top of this. So let me stop my prefatory remarks here. As I said, most of this panel we would like to hear from the panelists themselves. I will only intervene as and how is necessary. So let me start with Professor Ratna Sudarshan, and maybe Professor Sudarshan, I'll pose a couple of questions to you, but you can, of course, expand your remarks beyond them. You have studied informal work for a long time. You specifically studied women's work also for a very long time. So the linkages between paid work and unpaid work for women. What are the issues that arise when we talk about increasing women's participation in the paid economy, increasing women's voice in the workplace? So there's a whole set of issues when we're talking about formal or informal work here. So perhaps you could start by talking about that, and then I would also like you to reflect on the intersection between social protection and well-being of informal workers in the urban informal context particularly. So we can take it in either sequence.
Okay, sure. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. Actually, let me start by first, looking at this the question of social protection and informal workers. Now, just a little bit as background, so what I want to spell out a little bit is the linkage between the patterns of economic growth and the level and nature of social protection that is available to all workers, and particularly to informal workers. So as background, we know that there has been some provision for social security ever since independence, but its outreach has been very low. And in 2006, the National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector actually estimated that only 5 to 6% of workers in the informal economy were being covered by existing schemes of protective social security, that is, protection against contingencies such as sickness, accidents, death, and so on. Now, what we see is that after 1990 and more particularly after 2000, there's been a huge increase in the number of programs, the population coverage, the financial allocations made to social security programs. And at the same time, this is a period where we see a changed economic policy framework with greater openness of the economy, higher rates of growth of GDP, and so on. In other words, higher economic growth generating greater revenues has been the basis of this expanded attention to social protection, which is not really surprising because it is one way of mitigating inequality, and inequality that tends to increase with this pattern of economic growth. So we choose a pattern of economic growth that generates inequality, but then we are generating resources to strengthen social protection, to try and mitigate that inequalities to some extent. Now, just to illustrate this, if we look at a particular group of informal workers, say women home-based workers who are engaged in subcontracted piece rate work, supplying to domestic or global value chains. We did a study recently, HomeNet South Asia. I was also part of that study. Did a study recently looking at. The sample included home-based women workers who are so engaged in piece rate work, but these workers were linked to social enterprises, which acted as a sort of mediator between, the market and the buyer and the actual workers. Now, we came across some very interesting innovations, and I just mentioned one or two. So, so we know that state laws are obviously centrally important, and to some extent, if there is a code of conduct of the buyer, that also plays its own role. What we found interesting here was some innovations made by the social enterprises. And one of these was in how the workspace was organized. So most home-based workers, as the term goes, obviously work from their homes. But this one organization called Rangasutra, which is based in Bikaner, had set up village craft centers. Now these centers, are at walking distance from home. Women are free to go home during the day, so they are not sweatshops, but they provide safe storage for raw materials and tools and finished goods. They make the workplace more conducive and comfortable. They help to strengthen solidarity. So we see an innovation that's actually triggered. It's triggered partly by the requirements of the buyer, but it's really an initiative taken by the social enterprise, and a very interesting way of improving the conditions of work for women home-based workers within a framework where so we are not changing the structure within the women are working, but we are improving their conditions within that structure. Now, then comes the pandemic, and it very much illustrated how the vulnerability of being exposed to markets. And we see that the work suddenly stopped, and this really again highlighted the significance of not ignoring the local and the domestic market, which is what to some extent gave people some livelihood. So if we were to think of a pattern of development which is local development based and which builds upwards from there, this would generate a different pattern of economic growth, a different, necessarily a different kind of, level and nature of social protection as well. But also importantly, it would allow greater focus on what has been described as promotional social security, which is really development, education, health, sanitation, and so on, which tend to get overlooked because they are collective investments if we focus only on protective social security. Okay, so I'll stop there with that. And the second, very briefly, and I can come back to this later, but very briefly, if we look at women's work participation, the data that we have suggests that there's been a decline, particularly over the last 2 decades, and particularly in rural areas. And it shows actually a very low level of women's participation in the economy at approximately 20%. So there are lots of questions around whether we are actually capturing work properly. But also, if we take note of all the other things that women do, the care work, the unpaid work, the household provisioning, then there is no reduction in the time that they spent on work. So if we are looking at women workers, we need to very much see the home as a workspace. We need to look not only at clearly economic activities, but also a range of things that needs to be done to ensure that the household sort of survives, and things like water and a range of things, as well as care work. And so that changes the things we are going to look at, and what do we prioritize. Once again, if we look at low income groups, it is unpaid work done within households that takes the most time. And there's a case to be made not for lumping everything under the term care, but keeping a distinction between care and unpaid work, as the interventions required are very different. So I'll just stop for now, and maybe can come back later.
Thank you, Professor Sudarshan. Let me, so we'll come back to, I think, many of these issues that you raised. But maybe I can go to Mr. Wilson for a bit now. That Professor said also. But in addition, given your own work, would like to talk about two things in particular. One is the particular forms of vulnerabilities that face Dalit workers, or more broadly also other lower caste workers, who are forced into certain informal occupations, either forced in the sense of caste norms, or also because of lack of options and so forth. And where does one start in terms of organizing these workers and ensuring certain basic rights and protections? Or if you come from the top down, what have been the public policy responses that in your mind have been satisfactory or not in tackling these forms of the most degrading forms of labor, but also more broadly other precarious labor as well? So that's one question. And then if I can also ask you to reflect, when we talk about caste, it's not only about caste discrimination in the informal economy, but also in the rest of the economy, where the commanding heights, if you will, of the Indian economy, the corporate sector, the media, many others, repeatedly studies have shown that we are very far from achieving any kind of representation, let alone for scheduled castes or Dalits, but also for OBC castes. They're very far. So we have very upper caste dominated media, for example, and in general, there are many reports of caste discrimination that come out of corporate India as well. So if you can maybe offer some comments on that aspect in addition to the informal. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm so happy that we have started actually thinking about democratizing the workplace. So before we think about the democratizing the workplace, are we actually living in the democratic society or not? That is a question we must understand. So I feel very strongly that the Indian society is not as such a democratized society before and after independence. It's still continuing very inhuman and barbaric practices we are still practicing. And another one more thing is that freedom has given an opportunity for us to set up a goal of as a democratic society to develop. So how do we reform or how do we transform the Indian society as a more democratic way? We started learning very and the framework of the Indian Constitution. Unfortunately, today, before starting, I want to say, as a citizens, we are not actually as a more human beings. So we are only just as a citizens, as for the voting rights or something. But as a human beings, we have not grown. Still, that growth has stopped somewhere over here. Our traditional or our many cultural and our practices, like irrational practices of the caste and the patriarchy and illogical practices, are preventing us not to grow as a human beings. So if we are not a human beings to grow fully, then there is no point of thinking about we are as a better citizens or the sovereign citizens of this great country. So there we are missing, and our relationship, like example, we talk about the democratizing the workplace. So what is the work? So workplace itself is if the slavery. So slavery is workplace itself. The nature of the work itself is then a very undemocratic. So how we can make that as a democratize? We should not democratize that. We have to totally eradicate, we have to annihilate, we have to close that, and we have to prohibit. So as a law, we prohibited. In 1993, the manual scavenging, asking the another human being to come and clean the human excreta by hand, that we have completed, that we have already passed the act in the parliament. But are we really today come and say that we have eradicated the practice of manual scavenging from the country? That there are the ministers who are coming and telling in the parliament that you keep aside, that we can discuss later. But in the slavery, like this kind of forced occupations, particularly one is the toilet cleaning, another is sewage cleaning, septic tank cleaning, garbage and all the filth cleaning, dead carcasses taking out, and that is in a particular community only. Why this is happening with the only one caste group? So that caste, that irrational institution, which scientifically we are growing, but an irrational institution still we respect, we practice, and we live and we die with the same institution. So how many of us we are really want to challenge that institution? Without challenging that caste and another patriarchal institutions, we want to democratize anything is impossible. So that is what I want to say very open. Then in such circumstances, slavery is a kind of a big this thing. So where you make another human being to clean your excreta. Okay, you are doing that. So why? What is the reason? Why you are making? So you want to actually prove that you are superior than another person. For that reason we introduce. So after 75 years of independence, still why you are practicing that? So in these circumstances, democratizing is actually relation between the oppressed and the oppressor, how we are going to relate, how we are going to view, how we are going to criticize, how we are going to make a more democratized. The relationship here is the oppressors still think that if you don't clean my shit, who will clean my shit? That is their problem. And if you don't enter into the sewage and septic tank, if water clog and flow out, so who will clean that? We have not developed any other alternative mechanism where the machines can clean that. So why we have not developed? Not to develop, only reason is actually the casteist mindset will never allow us to do that as an immediate. So we think that this we can do later. This is no need to be do immediately. So the change of nature of the work is the most important. So I mean to say that there are the women who are cleaning the human excreta in the country. Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, few parts of the Rajasthan and Maharashtra, West Bengal and Jammu Kashmir. These are the states where the human excreta is cleaning by the human beings even today. So how do we discuss this subject of the democratizing? So it is not the democratizing actually. Understanding the democracy means what? And respect the equality of the each human being. Once we start accepting the equality, all are equal, then you cannot ask another fellow human being to come and die in the civil life. You will never going to force. So this is one thing which we have to take. So what is the actually role of the government? The government is also become like a spectator, and they don't want to actually make any changes. The thing is, in 1993 you prohibited the practice, and later you started counting the numbers and stating that this is God, this is out. and one day you will come and declare that there is no manual scavenging. So how dare a minister can announce in the parliament stating that there is no scavenging is happening in the country now. So it is all everybody has liberated. When there are women are there, they are cleaning, they know very well. And second is how many people died. They can't keep the count. So we learn from the primary school, from the actually counting the 1, 2, 3, 4. So the simple logic why we lost. We can't count the actual life of the people whom we lost in the civil line certificate. Why? So this is the, we don't have the democratic mindset. So if you don't have the democratic mindset, it is difficult for us to come out and make the democratization of the workplaces or anything. And to just closing, the COVID during that time, the frontline workers of the Safai Karmacharis, their situation is a very, very pathetic. When we closed all our doors shut, and the women and particularly the sanitation workers, they came out and they cleaned and they saved all of us. But when there is a facilities to provide for such frontline workers, you provided accommodation for everybody except the sanitation workers. You ask them to go and stay wherever they like, but the government has not provided, not given any special benefits. There is no safety care. There is no proper salaries. There are many things are there. So just to save this, no need to put the front line is the only name and exploit the people in the name of that, and you work very well, so you give the award. For the slavery is a crime that some everybody who are showering the flowers, such people they must understand. And to conclude, so democratizing is a process. There we are all there. Mutually we have to understand that and come, and one day we must declare that there is no manual scam. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Uh, I think the very powerfully you have put forward what is at the center of when one talks about democratizing the economy. One can think of workplaces or even think of the economy more broadly, that the lack of social democracy in India. And when I say that, I mean the persistence of caste and also, of course, patriarchy, because we were talking about gender and gender norms earlier, that the persistence of these structures, caste and gender structures, make any discourse on class based inequalities very complicated, because you're talking about almost every institution in the country, whether economic or not, being structured by these norms. And Dr. Ambedkar has said this very powerfully when he raised the question of can there be economic democracy without social democracy first. So what I would like maybe to come to each of you, and Annie is also here now. Annie, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you, but my something happened with my video. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. Okay. I can hear you well. That's fine. We can work without the video.
Right.
So maybe let me first come to you, Annie, and then we can go back to the concerns that have been raised earlier.
Yeah.
So just to update you on what we have spoken about so far, Professor Sudarshan was talking about women home-based workers and the challenges that they face with respect to both the recent COVID aspects, but also more long-term ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mr. Wilson was talking about manual scavenging and caste discrimination of the most degrading kind.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could bring in, and I was just saying that when we talk about class and democratizing workplaces from that perspective, class distinctions and so forth. And I should mention here that Mr. Wilson also pointed out that workplaces themselves are symbols of oppression. So should one be talking about democratizing them or abolishing them? And that's also perhaps something that you could speak to as well. So I was saying, to what extent in a society like India, where patriarchy and caste are such a huge context,
Mm-hmm.
can we speak about economic democracy? should we first be dismantling these structures, or how does that work? Does that does this go hand in hand? Can these struggles mutually reinforce each other and strengthen each other? Those against the worst kinds of class oppression, but also caste and gender. So you can take any of these, or if you wanted to offer your own reflections from a different end, that's also good for the beginning. We can go from there.
Yeah, right. Good evening to all of you. I will just to start with, I will just say that as India, we have entered into the 75th year of independence, and we are now today talking about democratizing workplace. So. In the 75th year of independence, we are celebrating. Of course, it is an occasion to celebrate. There is no doubt about that. And parliamentary democracy, we are always boasting about our parliamentary democracy with a federal structure. Then, if you look at the population, almost 50% of the population that is women, and as in other countries, we are also very aggressively these days following the neoliberal economic policies, and everyone knows that the major or main character of the neoliberal economic policy is nothing but exclusion, and it is exclusively for the corporates and rich business houses. And these are the facts, and in this with this background, we are discussing about democratizing workplace. So definitely, I would like to focus on women, and look at some of the data. Global gender gap: women out of 149 countries, India is at 108th position, and economic opportunity for women, we are at 142 position, and female labor force participation is around 20%, and all those things are there. This is national data as well as international data, and almost 95% of India's women labor force is in the unorganized sector, and unorganized sector, as everyone knows, that it is the sector, major sector, contributing largely into the gross domestic product, GDP, but at the same time it is the sector with no human rights, no worker rights, nothing but full of exploitation. So then if you look at where are the women, Indian women, then we can see that, as I said, more than 95% is unorganized sector, and even that you look at the agriculture sector, it is almost 84%. The women depend upon agriculture sector for their life and livelihood as workers and as cultivators, and 75% women are full-time agricultural workers, or they are engaged in agricultural activities. And look at the other section of women who are largely engaged in. One is, of course, accredited social health activist. This is known as ASHA worker. And around 1.5 million women are working in this scheme. And Anganwadi, it is childhood children below 6 years, their health, their addressing their malnutrition, all these, and pregnant women, lactating mothers, and the adolescent girls, all their health and other issues are dealt by these women, and they are around 3 million women. And midday meal workers, they are also millions. So, but you can see that all these scheme workers, we call them as workers, but the government is not recognized them as workers. when we talk about democratizing workplace, the women are not being recognized as workers. Then what to talk about democratizing the workplace? This is one. They are all being called as volunteers. This is a very, very serious issue which everyone need to think of. ASHA worker, ASHA means accredited social health workers. They are the first contact to the people even during this pandemic period, without any minimum wage, without any protective gears, without any social security. They are and they were in the forefront of all these crisis management throughout the COVID crisis, and they are the frontline health workers, but they are not recognized as workers, and but they are only volunteers. So India is having a government with which is trying now at present, a government which is there. These problems are not new, but the present government, what are they doing? They are actually trying to make India as a theocratic state, and that is their entire effort on the one hand. On the other hand, they are handing over all the national wealth and everything, whether it is land, whether it is water, whether it is forest, even the space, everything is in a new name. Their monetization pipeline, new names, they are handing it over to the corporates. And parliament is a place where policies and programs are made, laws are made, and that very on where the legislations are passed, those on the floor of this parliament, all those labor laws, labor legislations, all 44 legislations were they have thrown it into the dustbin, and the government have brought 4 labor codes. So parliament is being used to scuttle and all these legislations which are there to protect the workers, ensure minimum wage, ensure the all the rights of these workers as workers. But parliament is being used to dismantle all these legislations. Banks are being used to whitewash the non-performing assets. That means the loan taken by the rich business houses and corporates, because they are not paying it back, and to whitewash their fault, the rich corporate houses' fault. Government is using the parliament, and they are what they are doing. They are merging bank, and now there is some bad bank or something. Some new name has come, and even you can see that how parliament is used to pass 3 farm legislations, which are completely, even our public distribution system through which the ordinary families, poor families get a minimum quantity of food grains, even that will be undermined if these legislations are passed. So the parliament is being used by the present day government for hello.
Yes, please continue.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah, because even that everything has gone now. That's why I don't know. There is only the screen, white screen is there. So that's you can hear me.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
I am just concluding my initial this thing. So democratized workplace means you will have to, first of all, what is the new definition of workplace? That itself we must. What is now the workplace? In order to increase or facilitate the accumulation of profit by the corporates, even the definition of workplace is changed now, so that the companies need not adhere to the labor legislations. They need not pay the minimum wage. They need not ensure a conducive working atmosphere. So when the workplace itself is that definition is itself is in question, what can we say about, what can we talk about democratizing workplace? And here in India, we can see that the women, I said 95, more than 95% is in the unorganized sector. But invisibility is a phenomenon in India. Women, their work is never counted. So the care work, unpaid care work, everything is there. Women are doing 10 times more care work than the unpaid care work than the men here in India. And if all these things translated into monetary terms, it will be huge amount. But then women will, the government also, successive government, not only this government, they never bothered to calculate the value of women's care work or unpaid care work. So this is one. So invisibility of women's work is a phenomenon. When women's work itself is invisible, how can we, what can we talk about democratizing the workplace? And so in this background, we need to, I will, when we have some other, when you go for the questions and all, we can in detail discuss, but this is the situation. And here I must mention the last point. I must definitely mention here that when there was a government which was supported by the left parties from outside. It was led by Congress party, but left party supported that government from outside. At that time, this National Rural Employment Guarantee Act was passed, and that guarantees 100 days of employment to every family, every rural family. And the important point here in this act is that the wage is equal wage. There is no discrimination. When all other sectors, all other areas, the wage discrimination, wage gap is too high in India, but under NREGA, at least we are having that equal wage, men and women, whoever work under this act, they all get equal wage. So that is one good thing. So there are ways and means to address these questions. And that this is one of the example I definitely would like to quote. This is National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you for those reflections, Annie. I'll just maybe pull out a few things that came out in the three interventions so far, as in my understanding, and then we can go back maybe in the order that people spoke the first time. They can again offer some comments. The one thing that has come out is that if one, for example, approaches the democratic workplace kind of idea from the perspective of, let's say, the developed economies, the advanced industrial economies, where the conversation is about workplace, workers' voice in the workplace. Do workers have a say in what goes on? And you can carry that all the way up to cooperative workplaces, where there is no distinction between management and workers are running the workplace and so forth. There's a large number of experiments as well as writing around this idea in developed countries. One thing that has emerged from this last 45 minutes or so is that in a country like India, where, as I said at the beginning, there is a structural context of surplus labor, and on top of that there are caste and gender, at least caste and gender, the two kinds of inequalities that we have discussed. We need certain preconditions to be met before even we can make a realistic play at a democratic workplace. And what are those things? Those are major social changes in the way caste operates or the way patriarchy operates, and interventions at the level of self-employment, if you can call it that, or the casual labor market, which sets the floor to the rest of the economy. So when you think of something like HomeNet or the interventions that Professor Sudarshan was talking about with respect to home-based women workers, or what Annie said for Narega, these are workers who are at the bottom of the value chain, they are at the bottom of the wage pyramid, and these interventions help strengthen the that bottom and push it up to enable us to then discuss other things that might go on in the rest of the economy. To put it another way, if we don't intervene at this bottom of the pyramid, then there is no hope of actually realizing any changes at the top either, or elsewhere in the economy either. So, two things: structural solutions to surplus labor and putting in effective floors at the bottom, and attacking caste and gender norms and structures which are operating outside of the economy but also heavily inform what goes on in the economy. I mean, these are kind of two big takeaway points that I got. I would like to invite Professor Ratna Sudarshan to speak to some of the points that were made and maybe also respond to what I have said, if you felt that way, or any other intervention that you want to make at this stage.
Yeah, thank you. So I think absolutely. I feel it's worth giving a little more attention to the question of what are actually the workspaces that we're talking about, as speakers before me have made very clear. So, women home-based workers work in the home, street vendors work on the streets. We have construction workers for whom the construction site is the workplace. We have waste pickers for whom, maybe a garbage mountain is also a workspace. We have workers doing a range of jobs that, do not, firstly, the workspace keeps shifting. And secondly, it's not our standard understanding of a place you go to work because, it could be the street. Now, this means, of course, the labor codes are extremely important, and the labor codes also need to recognize this diversity of forms of the workspace. I would suggest that we could also broaden our lenses to include the significance of city planning. For example, if we are to ensure that street vendors actually have access to sufficient, and space is such a prime commodity in a city. So to allow more space for the activities that informal workers do is actually becomes a very political question and a very difficult thing to ensure. But so maybe it is as Professor Basole has said, it's really working to strengthen the bottom. But for instance, I had mentioned earlier village craft centers. So similarly, in our urban settlements, are there spaces that are available to people to do the 100 different things that need to be done? Do we think of homes still only as basic shelter? Sorry, I don't know why. Anyway, the pandemic also brought out how children need a quiet place to study. Women need a place to work. So a house or a home is more than simply basic shelter. Can we design homes with this in mind? Can we ensure there are enough public facilities for those who are working on the streets? These are collective investments. These could be a part of city planning. They are not individual transfers to individual households. That won't resolve these kinds of problems. So that's one thing I'd really like to put very strongly as something that we need to keep upfront and keep as an important way of moving forward. The other, just very briefly, is returning to this question of women, and the reason why I think it's important to spell out. So recently, several people have been using the care economy or the word care to cover a whole range of activities, including not just the care of children or the elderly or persons with disability, caring for people, but also the other things that need to be done. As I said, fetching water is a hugely important thing in our country, whether it's rural areas or even in urban areas, ensuring that there's adequate water, but other provisioning, there is, fodder, fuel, and many other things. These cannot and should not be lumped under the word care. They are different, distinct, they require different interventions. And the data tells us that for low-income women, the actual time spent on care of children actually is very small because they can't afford to spend more time. Most of their time goes in ensuring, these various things that come under the head of household provisioning. If one looks at higher income households, the time on care proper goes up immensely, because it's not just looking after children. There are aspirations for children to do better and so on, and the time spent on household provisioning goes down because systems are so much better. So in lumping everything, we run the risk that we may forget what actually is of high priority to the poor, and to ensure that we keep that in mind, it's a good idea to continue to use two words and list these separately. So let me just stop here.
Thank you. Let me not, I won't say anything. Let me move on to Mr. Bezwada Wilson to see if you would like to come in on anything that has been said so far or make any additional points.
I just want to make only small one thing, and that is regarding the my comment on the government. So the government must develop a mechanism to democratize actually, because there is a practice which is in a very old and very ancient, and unfortunately we do respect the illogical institutions. So these operations of the oppression and all, how do we actually stop? That is their own people will not change. For that, the government must come within a very clear mechanisms, and which can actually make the people as in a more function as in a more democratic. The function itself, and if the ministers and everybody must undergo with that, and that is also within a time bound, measurable with the indicators they have to come. So we can't run the show 75 years without the feeling of the democracy and thinking of and living in the democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Annie, would you like to say anything more, or we have about half an hour left in the session, so I would also like to see maybe there are any questions, but you have maybe time to make one more intervention before we open it up.
Yeah, just a small intervention. The point is that I just mentioned that everything is all the public sector undertakings and everything of the nation's wealth is handed over to the corporates. Then what is happening? The opportunity for the oppressed, the Dalits and the tribals and even the women, that opportunity is taking away from us when it is all privatized, because only the reservation is there in the public sector only, and private sector there is no such a provision, there is no such a reservations. So whatever opportunity even for the work is there, that also is taken away, snatching away from the people. And women need not be in all the time in the low skilled work. Women also, because 75 years of independence of a country, that is a long period, and women will have to be, women and the marginalized will have to have the opportunities in every sector, and from top to bottom. And there actually the when we say that we are a democratic country, but of the people, for the people, by the people, that norm is not followed. We have a written constitution and the directive principles. You see, it is very interesting. First, fundamental rights, then immediately after it is directive principles. The how to ensure these fundamental rights by the government. That is what is written in the constitution. Then only the fundamental duties comes. So whether the governments are following the constitution itself, that itself is a big question. So these are all very important to have opportunities. That also is a democratic right of all sections. So opportunities and equality in in wage and all other facilities. These are all democratic rights. So that needs to be ensured that democratic, whatever one may say, there are many lacunas, but that democratic, basic democratic norms and the basic tenets of our the constitution should be followed.
Thank you. Let me actually, before we maybe open up, I did think that it would be very good to get a round of comments on one particular thing, since all three of our panelists have spent many years, very close to the grassroots and understanding issues and organizing people and so forth. I thought if you could have one brief round of comments on what, in your experience or if you're drawing on your own work, has worked in terms of bringing us closer to, however we want to put it. It doesn't have to be an ideal situation, but some victories that have been gained through collective action, whether it's unionizing, whether it's other forms of coming together. Mr. Wilson, your work, Sudarshan, your work with HomeNet or other ways of organizing women home-based workers. Annie, of course, have been involved for many years with organizing different kinds of workers. If you could speak very briefly about what you have seen has happened, the power of organizing and what one can do when people come together. So maybe we can start with Mr. Wilson first this time, maybe then come to Professor Sudarshan and then end with Ms. Annie Raja. Yeah, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah. See, one is important, this whole thing, democracy, we have to start respecting that, and the democratic forces to really emerge in India, the government has to support. That is not happening as an institution. Again, repeatedly, I want to say that they cannot just leave to the people to develop emerge the democracy. I am not thinking that we are living in the democratic society. There are the certain things and the norms, and there are the certain oppressions still continue, and much more to that, the additional things are also now emerging. So many things are coming, and for that, there are the people who are there in the power. They support such things, illogical things. And those things we have to, and violence also day by day it is increasing. Those things they have to take into the consideration. If you don't respect the democracy, definitely there is no scope for the India-like countries. And here the majority, vast majority, has not even tasted the fruits of the democracy.
Thank you. Professor Sudarshan?
Yeah, thank you. So, now whatever I've understood from studying the experiences of those who have tried to organize women workers in the informal economy, I think one thing that sort of cuts across, and it's important to recognize, is that those who have been successful, by successful, I would say an organizing that has been sustained over the years, and where there are some, some concrete achievements that one can see after a few years, that all of these attempts have not organized women only around their work, but have also looked at their practical needs, the situation at home, problems at home, things like domestic violence or, whatever be the need of that particular group or that particular woman. So extending, the organizing beyond just work-related issues to all of these other, if I can just call them home-related issues, that has been, you can see it in all of the successful organizing experiments that I've been able to study over the years. And so, it suggests that when we are working with women, there's a slightly different approach or a different work or a different canvas that one needs to cover in organizing.
Thank you. Annie?
You see, through these years, for the last 74 years, we are into the 75th year of independence. Through these years, we have struggled a lot and we have achieved many things. But unfortunately, the present government is taking away again, snatching away all those things which we have gained through our blood and our dead bodies, over the blood and dead bodies of the women of this country. And even for that's what everyone pointed to the fact that the labor legislations, all those 44 legislations are put into dustbin, and they have brought 4 labor codes and new definitions to workplace and all these things. So this is a huge setback for the organized or the workforce of this country. And the women friendly legislations or children friendly legislations to prevent crimes against women and children, or even the SCST Prevention of Atrocities Act, which is there, which has strengthened to prevent crimes against the marginalized sections of this country. But there is no those legislations are the result of consistent campaigns and struggles of the people of this country, but for the implementation, there is no political will and social commitment from the part of this government, particularly of the present government, the BJP government at the center. That is why the violence against women or the marginalized Dalit or tribals and even minorities. I must quote one example. Even just before we were entering into the 75th year of independence, just in front of Parliament, a section of the fascist organization members, they were shouting slogans and violent slogans against Muslim people of our country, and it is just outside the Parliament. So those sort of situation which creates divide among people, which creates terrorized people, it leads to hatred, and all those things are all those what we can say, all those unwanted and dangerous things are happening in our country. So on the one hand, we are struggling and we are gaining. On the other hand, the government is taking away all those gains. So the struggle need to be intensified, or because we will have to safeguard what we have achieved, and we will have to get more things which we want to see that as a citizen, as a human being, and all the rights are available to us. I'll stop here.
Thank you. So I think what we can do is we still have about 20 minutes. I'm not able to see if there are any questions in the chat from participants. I wonder if one of the speakers is able to see if there are any questions. If so, we can address those.
There's one question from Amit Thorat. And the question is, how can we think about egalitarian hiring practices in the private informal sector, especially for caste and gender representation?
Yeah, would anyone like to speak to that?
So I can say something. I think this is an impossible question. Yeah, go ahead, please.
We have to cultivate a habit like there's a democracy in our life. Unfortunately,
either of you can go. Mr. Wilson, would you like to say something in response to the question?
Yeah. So, the problem here is when the democratic voices are too open, there should be an atmosphere to hear him. You are unable to hear me?
Sorry, I think he can't hear me. So you might.
Can you hear me?
Repeat the question. It's in the chat. It has been reproduced in the chat.
Yeah, Mr. Wilson, would you want to respond to this question by Amit Thurat on how we can counter discriminatory hiring practices in the private sector?
See, there is no actually such mechanism we have developed, but
We have a network issue at his end.
we are going for the privatization, but we have not developed any.
Presentation, you can go ahead for now. I think we can see if you can join.
So can we not hear him? Or?
Hello?
Yeah, I could hear him, but he's now, I think, not speaking.
Even I can hear Wilson.
Only Amit is not able to hear.
Amit is not able to.
Yeah, so
I can hear.
please
No,
go
no,
ahead.
Amit Basole.
The other Amit. I am not even here. Please go ahead.
The two Amits we have today.
So please go ahead. I think.
And Amit also changed completely, so it is very difficult unless you see the name and the down. Huh? So actually there is no such atmosphere created for the people, that one. And second is this private sector, we have no affirmative actions as such we develop. So when there is you said that when the new economic policy introduced, we said that there will be a human space we are creating. So where is the human face? After, say privatization is also an economic reforms. When we introduce, that is actually against the poor and oppressed. The poor and oppressed have got a kind of a simple way of living through the public sector or with the government, because we don't have any natural resources and no assets, nothing. So where is the you can put your legs and get up and state that I am a citizen of this country so loudly? So that the base when we are not having, we started slowly destroying such norms and such places and spaces and voices. So we, in the name of the democracy, we are already started crushing the spaces of the democracy, places, spaces, voices. This we have to again regain, and if you don't stop that, it is a very difficult, and people will understand democracy means something else. That is the major problem we are facing today, because we have never experienced the true democracy. So today somebody is coming and telling that some kind of a practice, and that is only through the elections it is coming, and through the majority, and the people may forget actually what is the democracy.
Amit?
Yes.
No,
Possible.
other Amit.
I think he's muted.
Yeah, you were about to say something on that point.
Please go ahead, because I couldn't hear Mr. Wilson, so I wasn't sure if he was done or not. Please carry on.
Yeah, he has done.
Yeah, he just finished. So what I was going to say is that, I mean, I think this is actually an impossible question to answer, because we know it's extremely difficult. I just wanted to say that there's one, that if we look at domestic workers, we actually see a great deal of, people are, a large number of those who hire domestic workers do look at such things as caste and, particularly, so for certain tasks, they will want certain castes and so on. And there are examples of agencies that have been set up by, sort of people who wanted to get rid of these, who have insisted that, when they mediate, that they will not take any of these factors into account. So, okay, but then this is, you end up having a small group of employers who may not be, who are ignoring these factors, but it's hardly changing society. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Go ahead, Anani, if you want to.
Yeah.
Sorry, Amit, you can. Yeah.
No, I'm just curious about all the work we do on representation in various occupations and across various, spheres. We find that uh, in the absence of reservation, it's very difficult to imagine any kind of representation that you see nowadays. And to my mind, it seems that if things are getting worse in terms of representation, and with rising inequality and assetlessness, and how feasible is it to start again rethinking and revisiting the question of affirmative action or reservation in the private sector? I think that is something I want to evoke and provoke for the speakers to think about. That's all. My intention was.
Amit,
Yes,
can I
ma'am.
come in? Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Exactly. This is what I was about to say. You see, when it is also the responsibility of a sensitive government. Unfortunately, our government is not that sensitive. That's a different thing. When you go for privatizing everything, you should see that whatever is available, just like affirmative actions were there, that also should be ensured in the when you privatize that private sector. That campaign is there, that struggle is already there, demanding reservation in private sector also, but the government is not actually responded to that question. I definitely would like to say that to address all these questions, a participatory democracy, that idea needs to be. Democracy is there, even Panchayati Raj, 3-tier Panchayati Raj, there also we can see that how the local bodies, local governing systems are in a collective way they are functioning, and they are bringing, there are problems, but in spite of all that, how they are coming together and planning together, even NREGA, how the plan is done and all. So a participatory democracy should be ensured, and but these are all goody things to say, considering the character of the present day government.
Thank you. Does anybody want to specifically respond to this question of private sector reservation? I think Amit has raised a very good point about whether something like this can happen in the absence of state action. And Mr. Wilson has repeatedly stressed that public actions, government's role is key in doing a lot of these things, because let us just say that unprompted, these changes are not occurring at the pace that we would wish them to occur. So clearly, the government plays a huge role in promoting such change. And here is one policy which we know has worked in the public sector, but with the declining importance of the public sector, the time has certainly come to have this debate on whether affirmative action should be extended to the private sector, where indeed the majority of employment will lie for the foreseeable future. So what do we think about the feasibility? I mean, is this something that we can see workers' organizations taking up or unions taking up and so forth? If there's any comments on that people want to make, otherwise, and if there are any questions in the chat, we will take it and then we will end.
Amit, this demand is already there, and it needs to be popularized, and popular actions in the sense that bringing together all organizations together around this demand is so important. This sort of an affirmative action reservation in private sector. Now the political parties, particularly of left parties, are talking about this, but larger campaigns need to be created and organized. Then only it will be. This government is not here to listen to anything of the demands of people. So it is very difficult. But the people's coming together and people's campaigns can definitely, because we know how we have achieved so many things. So even before people's power, any government will have to surrender. That is what. So for that, we need to be political parties as well as civil society organizations and workers. Everyone should come together to see if that thing is really happened. A political will and social commitment is needed from the part of us. Wilson said government should take initiative. That initiative will come only when there is political will and social commitment. And it is our responsibility to create that, to force, to show that political commitment and social responsibility.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that you're able to see in the chat? Once again, I'm not able to see if anybody has posted anything.
No, there are no other questions.
Okay, then I think we can wrap up with if there's anybody who wants to make any concluding remarks. I think Mr. Wilson may have already gone off. I don't see him here. But if either of you want to make any concluding remarks, and then we will wrap up. Okay, if not, I would like to thank all the participants. This is not a thing that 1.5 hours really ever suffices for. So, as usual, a lot of things are raised and not answered. But thank you to all the speakers for bringing your long years of experience to this issue. And thank you for the participants for attending. Have a good evening or afternoon, wherever you are.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Ratna.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah.